If you'll turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Isaiah, chapter 43. Isaiah, the 43rd chapter. Beginning with verse 14, reading from the New Living Translation of the Scriptures. The word of the Lord is as follows. This is what the Lord says, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. For your sakes I will send an army against Babylon, forcing the Babylonians to flee in those ships they are so proud of. I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's Creator and King. I am the Lord, who opened a way through the waters, making a dry path through the sea. I called forth the mighty army of Egypt with all its chariots and horses. I drew them beneath the waves, and they drowned. Their lives snuffed out like a smoldering candlewick. But forget all that. It's nothing compared to what I'm going to do. For I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry, Lord have mercy, rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me. The jackals and owls, too, for giving them water in the desert. Yes, I will make rivers in the dry wasteland so my chosen people can be refreshed. I've made Israel for myself, and they will someday honor me before the whole world. Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Rebuilding the future. Rebuilding the future. We close out our examination of the 4 R's that frame the R400 movement. The first 3 are reconnecting, reconciling, and reclaiming. As we've gone on this biblical journey of looking at these values, we learn that we reconnect through being shaped by the truth that we learn about each other. That possessing such truth creates a freedom to fully engage in connections that bring about reconciliation. And we learned some of those truths this past weekend that creates greater freedom for us to be able to reconnect, and then allows us to begin that healing that was talked about, that reconciliation. We established also that our reconciliation happens through our looking at the truth of our separation through the frame of God's overarching purpose that sees our ancestors not in terms of their being sold, but their being sent. And they were being sent here, and they survived, and they succeeded. And we are a part of that succession, and now God has uniquely placed us in the position to serve, to help others. And having been reconciled, we then understood that we are properly positioned to reclaim what's been lost. And in order for us to reclaim what's been lost, we have to have a sense of loss that impacts us, that moves us, that causes us to lay claim to the person and promise and plan of God for our lives, to seek the Lord's will concerning the lost, because there's some things you ain't supposed to go after again. You got to find out what the will of God is, and then be willing to go with less and to trust God to provide what's necessary, and to take some definitive action and experience God's determined outcome. It is here that we come now to the 4th and last R, which is rebuilding the future. having experienced that which was not within our control and against which we often felt helpless in the past 400 years, we want to intentionally take steps to own our future. Not just for ourselves, but for our descendants who come after us. And that choice to take ownership of our future is the choice to reimagine and to reorient ourselves based upon a sense of who we are, what we desire, and what we believe is possible. In the midst of my preparation, I was quickened to the fact that this notion of rebuilding the future is not just a collective consideration. It is also an individual one. Because even as I'm speaking, there are those right here and those in the other campuses and those of you who are watching by way of a stream who have experienced a shattering disruption in your life. Circumstance or a set of circumstances has hit you with such gravity, with such weight that you feel like you're Humpty Dumpty. That all the king's horses and all the king's men are not able to put you back together. And as I considered what word there might be for you, for me, for all of us, for those of us who seek to rebuild collectively and individually, God spoke this word to my spirit from the prophet Isaiah, and that was even before we ever knew WeatherTech existed. God speaks this word in response to the people who have suffered disruption and devastation by what was the Babylonian exile. They had witnessed their city, Jerusalem, reduced to rubble. They had seen their temple ransacked. They had seen their best and brightest taken into exile, where they were put into a Babylonian immersion program. And that program was designed to destroy any sense of their cultural and religious identity. So distraught were they that when there were those in Babylon who tried to taunt them into singing some of their own songs, they would respond by saying, "How can we sing the Lord's songs when we're in a strange land?" And in the midst of that experience, God has the prophet Isaiah to speak some comfort and encouragement to them. He calls them to a posture of reimagination, of reorientation, and indeed rebuilding. As God speaks this word through Isaiah, notice, if you will, that when you open that chapter in chapter 43, God does not start out talking about the people. No, God starts out talking about himself. God starts out not talking about where they are. He starts out giving his background. He is the God who created them. He is the God who formed them. He is the God who called them by their name. He is the God who predicted what he'd do and then did what he said he'd do. He's the God who is from eternity to eternity. He's the God from before there was a beginning. And he is a God in whom there is never an ending. He is the Lord. He is Jehovah. He is Yahweh. He is the I am that I am, he says. He is the Holy One. He is the one who is distinctly different from everybody else. There's nobody quite like him. He is their creator. And the word for creator in this instance is not that he's necessarily talking about the shaping activity. No, it is him talking about the initiating activity. That is to say, he speaks of their coming into existence by divine fiat. He speaks to their beginning, and he speaks to their rebuilding, not in terms of their human initiative, but it is by his divine arrangement. That is to say that God is the one who makes things happen. the God who was the source of their start. He says, I'll also be the start. I will also be the source of your restart. And so he reminds them of his background, centering on the experience of the Exodus. In Exodus 14, he reminds them that he opened the Red Sea. He's the one who enabled them to cross a body of water on dry ground. And then he threw the horses and chariots of Egypt into complete confusion and drowned Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. And so what we come to understand about this rebuilding the future, first of all, rebuilding the future on an individual or collective basis has to always start with God's background. It has to always begin by catching sight of recalling who God is and what God has done. For the people of faith, any notion of rebuilding, any notion of reorienting your life, any notion of reimagining your life must have God as its origin. It is to recall your beginning with God. And by your beginning with God, I don't mean the beginning of your consciousness of God. I mean the very beginning of your life. The very beginning of your life was with God. That is, before you were ever conscious of God, God was very much involved with you. You began with God in eternity, and then God set your becoming in motion in time. And he did it such that he knew you while you were in your mother's womb. He watched you in seclusion. He wove you together in the darkness of her womb. He saw you before you were born. And guess what? Every day was recorded in his book before one day ever began. In other words, your start and my start began with God. That is, before I could imagine anything, God had imagined everything about my life. Before I had imagined one step of my life, God had already imagined all of my life as it should be. He imagined everything that my life could ever be and how he would use everything, including the surprises, how he would use it to make me into the person he first imagined me to be. And friends, that's why God is not just the God of your start. He's the start of every restart you'll ever have. Because he's the God of your start who knows who you should be. He is able to take every misstep, every mistake, every mishap, every misfortune, every misdemeanor, every setback, and he is able to provide you a restart to become who you should be. In other words, what I'm trying to get all of us to understand is the capacity to see our individual or collective lives rising from the rubble is not the result of our sheer intellect. It is not because we have that strong of a human will. The capacity to see yourself rising from the rubble comes from the God who knows where every piece within the rubble is and how every piece within the rubble of your life will fit back together. It comes from the one whose knowledge of you is so intimate and intricate that he knows every missing piece, regardless of how large or how small it may be. He knows every thought. He knows every feeling. He knows every ambition. He knows every aspiration. He knows every desire. He knows every broken dream, every frustrated vision, every dashed hope, every shattered aspiration, and he knows how they fit. He knows where they fit. He knows with whom they fit. He knows when they'll fit. He knows the rebuilding process. Why? Because he initiated your life in the first place. He initiated the dream. He initiated the vision. He initiated the aspiration. He initiated the hope. It didn't begin with you. It began with him, and he gave it to you. And because they have their start with him, they also have their restart with him. And that's why there's somebody who can testify that when your life was hit and your life was shattered and you could not imagine yourself getting back up, somehow you got back up, because it was not a matter of your imagination. It was because God had already imagined it for you. The capacity to reimagine and rebuild is based upon God having already imagined, having already rebuilt. You see, there is God's imagining, which is singular, and there is our imaginings of ourselves, which is plural. Tell your neighbor, you got to take grammar. Singular God, plural you. In other words, God's imagining is singular. It is whole. It is complete. It is eternal. Our imaginings are plural because they are incomplete. They are fractured. We are bound by time, which means we don't see who we are tomorrow. We only see ourselves in terms of our past and in terms of our present. What we see is incomplete, and it necessitates constant reimagining. And every time you and I are forced to reimagine ourselves, we gain another part of God's initial and absolute imagining of who we are. That's why when certain breaking situations happen and we can't imagine how we'll get through them or how we are able to get through them, and we do get through them, we see ourselves in new ways, but they are not new to God. God had already imagined your getting through them, and God already imagined who you would become after you came through them. And in this very moment, God is speaking to somebody's reimagining of yourself. And as you do, you are coming into a greater form of whom God has already known you to be all along. And even though you did not imagine yourself being as strong as you become, God did. Even though you didn't imagine yourself being as resilient as you've been, God already saw it. And even though you didn't see yourself being as creative and innovative as you've had to be, God said, I see it. And that's why every time when your back was against the wall and you had to go to God because you did not know how you were going to get your way through, and God downloaded supernaturally an idea, a way, a response, God said, I've already imagined you to be who you are having to be. That's why whenever you see an obstacle, you ought to look for your opportunity. Because God is saying, I'm going to use that obstacle as the opportunity for you to come into greater conformity with whom I've already seen you to be. That's why you can never get too comfortable with where you are, even though you like where you are, because where you like where you are is not where God knows you should be. And so God says, I've got to create some divine discomfort to move you into becoming whom I have. Rebuilding the future, therefore, requires operating by God's blueprint. Right after God tells them about his background, God says something seemingly contradictory. Right after God talks about how he opened the Red Sea, allowed them to cross over on dry ground, how he drowned Pharaoh's chariots and horses and army in the Red Sea, God says, but forget that. He opened up the Red Sea, allowed them to cross over on dry ground, drowned Pharaoh's army. Many of us would say a praise goes right there. And you're right. Yes, a praise does go there. Yes, that's a part of their history. Yes, they should be grateful for it. Yes, they should tell their children. Yes, there are lessons to be learned. Yes, there were stones set up as a memorial for what God did. And while there's yes to all that, God says, forget all that. How can you forget what God just did? How can you forget the ways that God has made? How can you forget the battles that God has fought? How can you forget the sickness that God has healed or the... No, you can't forget. Tell your neighbor, I can't forget that. I can't forget. And in one way, you're correct. But again, God says, but forget all that. When God says right here, forget, he's not talking about developing amnesia. He's not talking about becoming dementia or Alzheimer's. He's not even talking about erasing the factuality of those things. By forgetting in this instance, God says, stop talking about it. Stop reciting it. Stop invoking it. Stop talking about, child, you remember how good it was back then? You remember when we were at Keller? Remember at Baseball Road? You remember? He says, stop invoking, stop reciting, stop expecting. Because as God is speaking of the future that they were about to experience, he says, stop reciting, invoking what happened back then. And the reason why is that he doesn't want them acting on what they've been reciting. He does not want them acting on or being shaped by what they've been invoking. Because what they were reciting and invoking is not the blueprint for their rebuilding. He's not going to make them who they once were, because that was an incomplete version of his imagining. That is, don't look at what was to be the indication of what will be. They can't look at his next work through the blueprint of the last work. You see, friends, and y'all are getting silent, and I know why you're getting silent. As the God of your start, and as the God of your restart, as the God who built you and the God who is going to rebuild you, God knows not only the previously existing pieces, but God says, I also know the pieces that have to be added to make you more of his complete imagining of who you are. Can I give you an example? When a city experiences the disruption and devastation of a hurricane that reduces parts or whole buildings to rubble, the rebuilding endeavor always requires some new and different things. There are new and different designs, new and different materials, new and different specifications. That is to say, if you were to go down to Florida where those hurricanes hit them, in the newest buildings, they have different types of windows now. As a matter of fact, in the newer buildings, you don't even have those shutters that the older buildings have, because they have made it necessary. It's in the requirements that your windows have to be able to give and sway, such that when the winds come, and if you're in one of those buildings and you start seeing the windows going like this, it is because they are designed to go like this so that they don't shatter. As a matter of fact, the buildings that are built are done in such a way that when certain winds come, even the building has to be able to flex. That's a new design. That's a new operation. That's a new specification. And there has to be a forgetting about all that was, because there are new drawings, new specifications, and new expectations. Now, I'm just trying to help somebody understand that God is saying that the drawings of what was are insufficient for whom God is making you now. In other words, you can't become the latter you still holding on to the former you. You can't receive the latter things by trying to still hold on to the former things. You can't seize the future if you're trying to replicate your past. Can I let you in on something? The blueprint is different because God is doing something different. Did you catch it? God says he's doing a new thing. God says, I'm doing a different work in a different place for the same people. That's why they got to stop talking about the old work. I'm right there in the Bible. God says, I'm the God. I dried up the Red Sea. That is to say, the old work was drying up water. Lord have mercy. Reading is fundamental. He said, I'm the God who dried up the water and made dry ground. But he says, what I'm about to do, I'm about to bring water to dry places. Lord have mercy. Where there's been no water, I'm about to bring water to dry. I'm about to turn dry land into a river. Before I dried up a river and made dry land. And if y'all looking for me to make dry land again, y'all gonna miss me, because I ain't about to make no more dry land. I'm about to take dry land and make a river. You'll catch it in a minute. God said, but before I drowned Pharaoh's army, I destroyed those who were trying to cancel my blessing. But God says, now I'm going to cause the wild animals, I'm going to cause the jackals to be thankful for Israel's blessing. That is those that should be predisposed to harming you. This time, I'm not going to take them out. I'm just going to let your blessing change their minds and have them thank me. I'm trying to let you know, when God tells you to forget, when God tells you stop reciting and stop inciting, God is saying stop looking for everything to be made dry and clean for you. Now God says, I'm about to bring a flood of water, which means there's going to be some muddy times for you. But tell your neighbor, it may be muddy, but it'll still be God. Lord have mercy. There will be some jackals and hyenas in your vicinity, and you'll be expecting me to move them out your way. But God says, no, I'm going to let them stand, because I'm going to prepare a table before you in their very presence. I'm anoint your head with oil, and your cup is going to run over, and I'm going to do it in such a way that rather than them leaving, they're going to give thanks to me, because my blessing has blessed them. And that's why, friends, it pays to know what God's blueprint is and to be willing to drop the old script when God is shooting a new scene. Tell your neighbor, sometimes you got to drop the script from yesterday, because that ain't the scene for today. Is there anybody who can testify, if I had known that God had a new scene for me, I'd have dropped that script years ago? Is there anybody in here who can testify, if I had known God was going to bring Denzel, I would have kicked Bullwinkle to the curb a long time ago if I knew? In other words, what I'm trying to get you to realize is there's a new scene for you. And God is calling for you to tear up your old script. He's saying, tear up the old tapes, tear up the perceptions, tear up the old responses, tear up the old lenses. He said, some folk, I ain't going to bring them back because they ain't a part of your new scene. Stop looking for me to make it like it was, because that ain't what I got for you anyway. If I wanted that to be that, it would have stayed that. You'd still be there. They'd still be with you. But I got a new scene for you. I got a new script. You got to be able to tear up the old script. Yeah, you got to be able to tear up the old script. Because he said, I got a new scene. Am I talking to anybody who was afraid to tear up your script? But God said, I don't have a new scene. I got a whole new movie for you. Lord have mercy. You were looking just for a scene to change. And said, God said, no, I got a movie for you. As a matter of fact, I don't just have one movie. I got a series of movies. I got the prequel, I got the real, and I got the after. I know you were just looking at Luke Skywalker, but I got another whole generation coming behind you. So rebuilding the future requires starting with God's background and building according to God's blueprint. But then there's something else. God says, if I'm going to rebuild it, you got to ignore the old boxes. God says, He's doing a new thing. He says, I'm initiating something new. He says, I'm about to do something you've never seen before. You've never seen before. And this word never refers to the object of the material being created. This word never, it doesn't refer to the material. It speaks to the newness, the novelty of the created object. It's as if God is saying that what I'm about to do isn't going to come from anything that is. It's going to come simply because it's on my mind. And he takes us now back to Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth when there was nothing and when there was nobody but God. God created everything that was and is simply by his mind. He spoke everything into being when there was nothing but just him, and everything that was and is came into being simply because it started in his imagination and was ushered in by way of his speech. Everything except humanity. Because from us it says he created us from the dust of the earth, but the dust of the earth came from his speaking. The God of our build, the God of our rebuild, God says, I can start you when there's absolutely nothing. And when I want to rebuild you, I can do it with absolutely nothing. And the reason why you have to forget what was is because God is about to do, Lord have mercy. God says it's not going to have any reference to what's been. In other words, its materiality will have no prior substantive cause. In other words, you're not going to be able to point to anything back there to explain what God is getting ready to do in your life. Because it's coming to being is going to simply be because God said, I've had it on my mind. Yeah, you're not going to be able to look around for anything that's going to point to it being possible, because God said, that ain't what's on my mind for you right now. That's why God says it is nothing compared to what I'm going to do. Because God says what he's going to do now will come from nothing. Who he's going to bring is going to come from nothing. What he's going to make happen is going to come from nothing. It will not be based upon what he's done before. It'll be based simply because it's coming from him. Now, this is a prophetic word from somebody, because God is saying, forget the old boxes. He says, I'm all the way out the box. I've smashed the box. I've destroyed the box. In fact, he says, I'm going to do something that no box in your mind will be able to contain. He's doing something so new that the only thing that you'll be able to say is that God did it. God brought it. God made it happen. God brought it to pass. Now that's a little, for those of us who are detailed people, that's unnerving. Because we like details. And the thing about details is details are usually based upon past things. Yeah. Details usually have a reference to something that either is or was, upon which you can even base a forecast for the future. And God is saying, I ain't even going to allow you to do that, Robert. No. He says, because I'm going to do it from who I am, and I'm the God who can work with absolutely nothing. You're not going to get any details. And yes, you're going to be uncomfortable. And yes, it's going to be unnerving. And when people ask you questions, you're not going to have any answers. As a matter of fact, you'll have more questions than you'll have answers. And why are you going to operate like that? Why are you going to put me in that position? God says there's one reason why I'm going to do it this way. Because I'm making you for myself. He says, this ain't about your pleasure. Because if it was, it would be pleasurable. This one ain't for your pleasure. It's not for your convenience. It's not for your luxury, because I ain't doing it for any of that. I'm doing this for myself. He says he's making you for his pleasure. He's making you for his joy. He's making you for his glory. He's making you for his honor. He's making you for his praise. He says, when I do this, it's going to be so that you will know that there's nobody like me, and you will take pleasure in just who I am and the fact that I did it on your behalf. You're going to see me in a new way. I'm not just going to be the Santa Claus that gives you according to your list, because this one ain't on your list. When I bring this to pass, you're going to thank me for being the God who does exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or even think, according to the power which is at work within me. And then God says, you know what? I'm going to do it in such a way, because I've got a time called someday. He says, someday they will honor me. Someday they'll serve me. He says, someday you're going to honor me fully. Someday you're going to please me fully. Someday you're going to reflect me fully. Someday you're going to appreciate me fully. And that's the way God is. That's always been his background. When he built Adam and Eve with their rebellion and their fall, God said, even though they fell, I've already got a rebuild. I've got a restart. He announced their rebuild. There's someday in the garden when he told the serpent, he said, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman. Your seed will bruise his heel, and her seed will bruise its heel. God says, I've already got the rebuild. That's why no weapon that's formed against you shall be able to prosper, because everything the enemy could ever imagine, God has already imagined how he'll use it to make you whom God wants you to be. It's like you're in the matrix and you make a decision, but God said, I am so much God, even when you take the wrong pill, I'll use your taking the wrong pill to bring you out the right way. Am I talking to anybody in here? Is there anybody who can testify, I took the wrong pill and it should have destroyed me, but God said, no, I've imagined that, I factored that, I saw it even before you did it. I didn't want you to do it. I wrote in the sky, don't go that way, but since you went that way, I'm going to use it to bring you back to where I have for you. And so when Adam messed up, God said, I got something for that, and his name is Jesus. I'm going to bring him through a woman, I'm going to bring him through a virgin. I'm going to let him be born in Bethlehem. I'm going to let him live for 33 years. I'm going to have him die on a cross. I'm going to have him bear your sins. I'm going to have them say it's all over when they put him in the grave, but then I'm going to bring him back alive, because early Sunday morning, God raised Jesus from the dead, and he's alive forevermore. And I don't know how you feel, but I'm so glad that God saw me, and God saw and sees my somedays. God said someday that boy's going to give his life to me, and someday he's going to say yes to the call, and someday he's going to walk in a path of righteousness, and someday I'm going to bring him to a place called the Park, and someday they're going to launch the Park International Trade Hub, and someday the rain is going to fall, and someday the people are going to bless my name. I wonder, is there anybody here who can say, God is speaking to me? He's saying, I've got something new. I've already begun it. Do you see? You don't have to wait on my start. I've already started it. Can you jump into the flow? Can you grab your paddle and row where I'm going? Slap five with your neighbor and say, it's already happening. The river is already flowing. My God, the water's already coming. The rain is already falling. I'm going to jump into what God has for me. God is saying, I've got something new. He's calling you to jump in. So tell your neighbor, I'm forgetting what's behind. I'm forgetting where I was. I'm forgetting who I was. I'm forgetting what I had. I'm forgetting how I did, because God has something new.